Russian airstrikes continue in Syria, as do the diplomatic efforts to end the bloodshed and find some common ground between Washington and Moscow. The battle playing out in the Middle Eastern state has dominated world headlines and continues to dominate international political discourse, including at this week's EU summit in Brussels. But as we'll look at here today on the Press Review, there is another country besides Syria where Russia is trying to increase its presence. Writing in the New York Times, Nusaybah Yunus tells us what has caught less attention is Russia's evident intent to expand its influence further into Iraq. The United States can still try to prevent that through both political and military intervention, but time is short. Much depends on Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, who has of late been making remarks suggesting that in the absence of greater American firepower to help him fight terrorist Islamic State, he will turn to Russia for help. Yunus writes, "The first task for America is to persuade Mr. Abadi that permitting any Russian role in or over Iraq would be a terrible mistake. A Russian entry into Iraq would only strengthen Iraq's most sectarian Shiite politicians and militias, whom Iraq's Sunnis fear because of their alignment with Iran and their record of suppressing Sunni participation in Iraqi politics." Yunus says that so far, if America has taken something of a cautious approach to Iraq, then that has been justified because of the Middle Eastern state's complex religious, tribal and cultural politics. Moscow, on the other hand, would do things differently and worse. He writes, "Russia can be expected to have no such nuance in a strategy to defeat the Islamic State. It is likely to favor indiscriminate air power, as it has in Syria, and to turn a blind eye to abuses inflicted by Shiite militias on Sunni civilians. So, a thoughtless Russian intervention could prove a disaster for Iraq by undermining the political processes needed to replace war with a durable peace." Iraqi Prime Minister Abadi has already embarked on reforms in an attempt to rebuild the Iraqi state and bring peace between Sunnis and Shias. Success has been mixed, but still, says Yunus, his government is preferable to the alternatives, and Washington must step up its attempts to help. He tells us if the United States fails to support Mr. Abadi now, it risks seeing him replaced by hardliners who would further entrench the sectarianism that sustains the Islamic State. And it would condemn Americans to more years of expensive counter-terrorism in Iraq, a state already tempted to draw closer to the orbits of Iran and Russia. So our commentator today seems to be telling us that whilst events in Syria have been stealing the headlines, the geopolitical conflict between Russia and the US is in fact also playing out elsewhere, namely in Iraq, in a struggle which seems to be yet another facet of the confrontation between Moscow and Washington for influence over the Middle East. That's all we have time for today. Join us again tomorrow for another press review. In Kiev, this is Ukraine Today.